Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through a doorway into a world of whalebone, soot, and silent defiance. Picture yourself in a bedroom so frigid that every exhale materializes as mist in the blackness. Somewhere within these walls, a timepiece counts down toward a morning that will extract everything you possess. We're in 1870, more or less, and you exist as a woman in Victorian England, meaning your entire life is about to be regimented, examined, and compressed into structured undergarments. You likely wouldn't make it through 7 days in this place, not from any shortage of wit or strength, but simply because no one has conditioned you from infancy to withstand the sheer unrelenting theatre of Victorian womanhood. Each hour carries its obligation, each chamber enforces its regulations, and your physical form, it answers to your corset, your domestic sphere, your standing in society, seldom to your own desires. So before settling in, consider liking this video and subscribing, though only if you truly value the content I create here. And share with me, where are you tuning in from? What hour shows on your clock right now? Go ahead and lower the lights, let your breath find its rhythm, and picture yourself entering that icy bedroom where morning is about to arrive, prepared or otherwise. What strikes you immediately is how penetrating the cold feels. It infiltrates the bedding, winds around your lower legs, and touches your face like an uninvited visitor who showed up before midnight and has no intention of departing. Victorian sleeping quarters received no overnight heating. Coal cost money, and even in prosperous homes, the flames in personal rooms were permitted to expire once everyone had gone to bed. You regain consciousness in a space that maintains something near 50 degrees Fahrenheit, assuming fortune smiles on you. The glass panes are dense with moisture, perhaps even ice crystals, and the wooden planks below your bed feel like frozen slabs prepared to punish your unshod feet. You remain motionless for a heartbeat, buried beneath layers of woolen coverings and possibly a substantial quilt filled with down or cotton wadding. The heaviness feels reassuring, nearly protective, and some fragment of you desperately wishes to remain precisely where you rest. But the faint ash-coloured illumination creeping past the curtain margins informs you that daybreak approaches. And within a Victorian household, daybreak isn't a recommendation, it's a race gun. Here's what you need to understand about awakening as a Victorian woman. You cannot simply tumble from bed, pull on garments, and lurch toward coffee. There exists no coffee yet. There exists no lurching. There exists only the ceremony. And it commences before you've even completely opened your eyelids. If you possess wealth, or, at minimum comfortable middle station, a lady's maid might enter your chamber around 6 or 7 in the morning. She'll have already been conscious for no less than an hour, persuading the lower-level fires back into existence, warming water and readying the complex apparatus of your clothing. You detect her muted footsteps, the soft chime of a pitcher being positioned on the washstand, the delicate scraping of curtains being pulled aside just sufficiently to admit the reluctant winter illumination. She remains silent unless addressed. Her attendance is intended to assist, not interfere, a sort of spectre with remarkably skilled hands. The water within that pitcher reaches lukewarm temperatures at its warmest. Historians continue debating how frequently Victorian women actually immersed themselves in baths. Some contend that complete submersion baths occurred weekly at maximum, while others propose the middle and upper stations maintained better hygiene than we credit them with, employing daily sponge baths and energetic scrubbing. What remains indisputable is that you're not entering a heated shower. You're patting at your face and throat with fabric dipped in water that's already surrendering its warmth. And you're performing this rapidly because the chamber is freezing and your flesh is covered in raised bumps. Now arrives the corset. You've absorbed terrifying tales about Victorian corsets. The extreme tightening, the loss of consciousness, the damaged rib cages. Here's an intriguing detail historians enjoy highlighting. Most of those severe instances were amplified by moralists and journalists of that period, who delighted in attributing women's fashion for everything from hysteria to newborn death rates. The typical Victorian woman wore her corset at a reasonably comfortable tension, sufficient to maintain her posture and produce the stylish outline, but inadequate to genuinely limit respiration. Consider it less as an instrument of torment and more as an exceptionally rigid, exceptionally inflexible undergarment extending from your chest downward to your hips. That acknowledged, donning one presents no pleasant experience. Your maid, or if you're less privileged, your own protesting arms, secures you into this device while you grasp the bedpost or a chair back for balance. The supports are constructed from steel or whalebone, and they press against your ribcage with definite insistence. You sense your posture align almost reflexively. Your midsection draws inward. Your respiration transitions to your upper torso because your diaphragm possesses reduced space to expand. It's not agonizing precisely, but it's noticeable. You will remain conscious of this corset every solitary instant of the day until someone releases you tonight. Over the corset passes the chemise, an elementary cotton or linen undergarment, and then the drawers, which essentially constitute loose trousers separated at the crotch for functional purposes, will courteously bypass. Then the petticoats. In the 1850s and 60s, you might have worn a cage crinoline, that enormous bell-shaped framework that made women appear like ambulatory lampshades. By the 1870s and 80s, the bustle has assumed control, a cushioned or wired construction that protrudes behind you, providing your outline that characteristic shelf resembling posterior. Regardless, you're wearing multiple pounds of architectural engineering beneath your dress. The dress itself constitutes another undertaking. Fasteners, clasps, tiers, sleeves that must be positioned exactly right. The material might be wool, silk or cotton, contingent on the season and your financial means. And the pigments accessible depend on when precisely you're existing. Vivid aniline colorants became fashionable following 1852, supplanting the gentler, more subdued natural shades. You detect the subtle scent of lavender or cedar from the wardrobe blended with something mouldier. Ancient fabric, ancient air, ancient dwelling. By the moment you're completely dressed, 30 minutes have elapsed, possibly longer. Your hair still requires attention, secured, shaped, organised into whatever configuration is fashionable. And that's another 20 minutes at least. You haven't consumed anything. You haven't genuinely commenced your day, and already you've engaged in an intricate ceremony of restriction, moulding your body into the shape society anticipates before you're permitted to venture outside your bedroom entrance. The frigid chamber has warmed marginally now. Your maid has revived the fire to life, and several tentative flames are starting to snap in the fireplace. You catch the aroma of coal smoke, acrid and recognisable, underscored with the dusty warmth of combusting wood. The floorboards no longer feel entirely so antagonistic beneath your stockinged feet. You draw a breath, a restricted one, courtesy of the corset, and ready yourself to confront the day. But perhaps you're not the lady within that cold bedroom. Perhaps you're the one who ignited the fire. Let's adjust your viewpoint for an instant, because the Victorian reality appeared vastly different depending on which side of the bedroom entrance you awakened on. If you are a housemaid, a scullery maid, a maid handling all duties, or any of the innumerable young women who maintained these grand and not so grand houses functioning. Your day commenced long before the mistress even shifted beneath her quilts. You wake in blackness, total, dense, choking blackness. Your chamber is in the attic, positioned under the rafters, where the ceiling descends so low you've acquired the habit of ducking automatically. When you climb from bed, the window is tiny, scarcely larger than a serving plate, and it admits no illumination, because no illumination exists yet. It's somewhere approaching 5 in the morning, conceivably earlier, and the cold up here exceeds anywhere else in the dwelling. Warmth ascends, certainly, but so does disregard. Servant quarters were infrequently insulated, infrequently heated, and infrequently deemed worthy of comfort. You occupy this chamber with at minimum one other maid, maybe two or three. The bed is constricted, the mattress meagre, and the blankets are discards from the family's own inventory. Deteriorated, mended, sufficient, but nothing beyond. You've slept in your shift and possibly a shawl because the temperature descended below freezing overnight, and you possess exactly one collection of night clothes. The odour of the chamber is intimate and human: perspiration, inexpensive soap, the faint mustiness of aged wool and unwashed hair. Nobody criticises you for it. Everyone smells identical. Your feet contact the floor, and you inhale sharply at the cold. No carpet here, no mat, just exposed boards that protest under your mass as you grope in the blackness for your clothes. You dress by sensation: the identical black dress you wore yesterday and the day preceding, the identical white apron and cap that identify you as personnel. There's no looking glass in this chamber, so you secure your hair upward by muscle memory, hoping you've captured all the wayward strands. If the housekeeper discovers you appearing dishevelled, there will be commentary, possibly harsher consequences. Now you descend downstairs, cautious to avoid the steps that moan loudest. The family must not be interrupted. Your presence at this hour should be invisible, a phantom moving throughout the house, executing essential magic before anyone wakes to observe it. The kitchen is your initial destination. It's in the cellar, as most Victorian kitchens were, isolated from the primary living spaces to contain the heat, the aromas, and the servants themselves. The range, an enormous cast-iron stove that commands one wall, sits cold and lifeless. Your responsibility is to revive it. You kneel on the stone floor, which extracts warmth from your knees instantaneously and begins scraping out yesterday's ashes. The smell is bitter, chalky, catching in the rear of your throat. Coal ash infiltrates everywhere, beneath your fingernails, in the folds of your palms, smeared across your apron. Before the day has genuinely begun, you scrape the grate clean, position fresh kindling, add coal from the bucket, and coax a flame into existence with matches and patience. Here's an intriguing detail historians enjoy highlighting: matches as we understand them. The friction match you could strike on any coarse surface only became broadly accessible in the 1830s and 40s. Before that, servants employed tinderboxes or maintained a fire smouldering overnight, which was its own variety of expertise. By your period, matches exist, but they're still handled carefully. Waste nothing. The fire catches. You respire on it gently, nourish it, cultivate it until the coals radiate orange and the range begins to tick and ping as the iron warms. This stove will operate all day, preparing every meal, heating water, supplying the only dependable warmth in the below-stairs realm. You've granted it life. Now you must grant life to the remainder of the house. Upstairs you proceed, transporting a coal scuttle that weighs nearly as much as you do. Your arms protest already. You've performed this every morning for months, maybe years, and the muscles in your shoulders have solidified into permanent knots. The family's chambers need fires ignited before they wake. The drawing room, the dining room, the study, each bedroom that's presently occupied. You manoeuvre, silently, a professional haunting, kneeling before cold hearths and repeating the ceremony of ash, kindling, coal, flame. The aroma of smoke pursues you from chamber to chamber like a faithful dog. Some scholars dispute about just how demanding Victorian servants actually laboured. There's still discussion among historians about whether the punishing schedules we encounter in memoirs and household manuals were standard or unusual. Servants' own testimonies vary dramatically. Some recalled their positions affectionately, with sufficient food and reasonable mistresses, while others depicted conditions that approached abuse. What's indisputable is that a maid handling all duties in a modest household, with no other personnel to distribute duties, could labour 16 or 17 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, with only half of Sunday available for church and personal time. You're one of those maids. You labour in a house with a cook and perhaps a footman, but most of the cleaning descends to you after the fires are ignited. You'll blacken the grates with a special polish that leaves your hands stained for days. You'll sweep the carpets, not with a vacuum, which won't be invented for decades yet, but with a rigid brush and dustpan on your hands and knees, inch by inch. You'll beat the rugs outside, clouds of dust billowing around you until your lungs irritate. You'll polish the brass, wash the front steps, empty the chamber pots into the outdoor privy or the newfangled water closet if the house possesses one, and you'll accomplish all this before breakfast. The irony is acrid if you permit yourself to taste it. You've ignited fires in 6 chambers, but you're not permitted to warm yourself by any of them. You've handled food in the kitchen, but you'll consume your own meals standing upright in the intervals between tasks, usually cold remainders or bread and fat drippings. You make the house beautiful, but the beautiful portions of the house are not for you. Your hands are crimson and coarse. Housemaid's knee, a painful inflammation from constant kneeling, has already started to trouble your right leg. Though you're barely 20 years old, the skin on your knuckles splits in winter from the lye soap and the frigid water. When you finally glance in a mirror, in some stolen instant, you barely recognize the exhausted face staring back. But here's the reality. You're fortunate. You have a position. You have a ceiling over your head, food in your stomach, and a modest wage, perhaps £10 to £15 annually, that you dispatch mostly to your family back in whatever village or slum you originated from. The alternative is the factory, the workhouse, or the streets. So you kneel and you scrub and you transport coal up endless stairs, and you do not voice complaints where anyone can detect you. Somewhere above, the mistress is starting to stir. You detect the protest of bed springs, the gentle murmur of voices. Your invisibility is about to conclude. Shortly you'll be visible again, standing at attention, responding to bells, executing the daylight version of servitude that comes with observers. But for now, in this ash-coloured pre-dawn hour, the house belongs to you. The bell rings. It's a tiny, piercing sound, a brass bell mounted on a board in the servants' corridor, connected by wires to pull handles throughout the house. Each bell possesses a slightly different tone, and you've mastered distinguishing them the way a musician learns notes. That one is the dining room, that one the morning room. This one now is the mistress's bedroom, and it signifies she's awake and prepared to commence the elaborate performance of her day. But before you respond to that bell, before the house fully wakes into its daytime rhythms, there is the matter of breakfast. And in a proper Victorian household, breakfast does not simply occur. It is orchestrated. If you're back in the skin of the lady, let's return to her. Now, freshly corseted and styled, you descend the stairs with rehearsed grace. The corset enforces proper posture whether you desire it or not, and your skirts murmur against each step as you make your way toward the dining room. The aroma of food reaches you before you arrive. Bacon, definitely, and eggs, and something yeasty and warm, fresh bread or toast. Beneath it all, the ever-present undertone of coal smoke from the fires now burning in every occupied chamber. The Victorian breakfast table, for those who could manage it, was a thing of spectacular excess. We're not discussing a quick bowl of porridge here. A proper middle station or upper station breakfast might include bacon, eggs, sausages, kedgeree, that peculiar Anglo-Indian dish of smoked fish, rice and curry spices that became inexplicably fashionable, devilled kidneys, cold ham, toast, muffins, marmalade and pots of strong tea or coffee. All of this would be arranged on the sideboard in covered dishes, kept warm over spirit lamps or hot water, and family members would serve themselves whenever they wandered in. Here's the reality. This meal was not about appetite. It was about abundance. It was about demonstrating that your household could manage to waste food, because inevitably much of this spread would go unconsumed and be transferred down to the servants or discarded entirely. Conspicuous consumption. The Victorians practiced it, though they didn't employ those precise words. They just enacted it. You assume your place at the table. If you're a wife, you sit at one end. Your husband sits at the other, possibly concealed behind a newspaper. The distance between you is both physical and emblematic. Conversation at breakfast was often minimal. The morning papers demanded attention, correspondence needed examining, and besides, nobody was anticipated to be particularly brilliant before 10 o'clock. You eat in a sort of companionable silence, the clink of cutlery against china providing a gentle rhythm, the occasional murmured request for the salt or the marmalade breaking the quiet. But wait, before any food touches your lips, there may be another ceremony to observe. Morning prayers. Not every Victorian household practiced family prayers, but a significant number did, especially in the earlier and middle portions of the era. The family would assemble in the dining room or drawing room, sometimes before breakfast, sometimes after, along with all the servants who filed in and stood at the rear or knelt on the floor while the master of the house read aloud from the Bible and led everyone in prayer. This could last anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour, depending on how devout or long-winded the patriarch happened to be. For you, as the lady of the house, this is a moment of performance. You bow your head, you clasp your hands, you murmur the responses at appropriate moments. Whether you actually believe any of it is almost irrelevant. What matters is that you are observed to believe, that your household presents a unified front of Christian piety. Religion in Victorian England was as much about social respectability as spiritual conviction. A family that did not attend church, that did not observe the proprieties of faith, was a family whose morals were questionable, and questionable morals meant social exile. Here's an intriguing detail historians enjoy highlighting. Some servants absolutely detested these morning prayer sessions, viewing them as an extension of their labour rather than a spiritual benefit. They'd been awake for hours already. They had work waiting, and now they had to stand on aching legs while the master droned through Leviticus. Diaries and letters from the period occasionally capture this quiet resentment, though of course it was never expressed openly. You simply stood and listened and kept your opinions folded away like linens in a drawer. Historians continue arguing about the sincerity of Victorian religious practice. Some scholars suggest that genuine faith was widespread and deeply felt, shaping everything from family life to political policy. Others argue that much of it was performative, a social adhesive that held communities together without requiring actual belief. The truth, as with most things, probably resides somewhere in the complicated middle. Some Victorians prayed with fervent hearts, others went through the motions. Most perhaps did a bit of both, depending on the day. Now, let's say prayers are finished, breakfast is consumed, and the morning stretch is ahead of you. If you're a woman of means, with servants to handle the actual labour of the household, you might assume your time is your own. You would be mistaken. The Victorian lady's morning was scheduled as tightly as any factory worker's, just with different tasks. There were letters to compose, and you composed many, because the postal service delivered multiple times per day in cities, and correspondence was how you maintained your social network. There were menus to plan with the cook, accounts to examine, household inventories to inspect. If you had children, you might spend an hour in the nursery, though actual childcare was delegated to nurses and governesses. If you had daughters of marriageable age, you had the exhausting work of managing their social debuts, their wardrobes, their prospects. And looming over everything always was the matter of morning calls. But we'll address those in a moment. First, let's acknowledge something. You're exhausted. You've been awake for perhaps 2 hours. You've been secured into a corset, sat through prayers, performed social niceties over breakfast with a husband who may or may not have acknowledged your existence beyond passing the butter. And the day has barely started. The tea is lukewarm now. You take a final sip anyway, tasting the faint bitterness beneath the sugar, the slightly metallic edge that comes from water boiled in a kettle that's seen better days. A servant appears to clear the dishes, moving with that rehearsed invisibility you've come to anticipate. You don't look at her directly. You rarely do. She is a function, not a person. At least that's what you've been instructed to believe. Outside the window, the street is coming to life. You detect the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the distant cry of a street vendor selling something. Milk, perhaps, or muffins, or flowers. The day is grey, as London days so often were, the air dense with coal smoke that turns the sky a perpetual sepia. Later, if the fog rolls in, you won't be able to see across the street. But for now, the morning is young, and duty calls. You rise from the table, smooth your skirts, and prepare to perform the next act in this endless theatre of respectable womanhood. The clock in the hallway strikes 11, and you feel a small knot tighten in your stomach. It's almost time. The portion of your day that requires the most exhausting mental energy is about to begin, and it has nothing to do with physical labour. You're about to enter the battlefield of morning calls. Now here's the first absurdity. Morning calls didn't occur in the morning. Despite the name, these ritual social visits took place in the afternoon, typically between 3 and 6 o'clock. Why call them morning calls then? Because Victorians had a peculiar relationship with time. Morning meant everything before dinner, which was served anywhere from 5 to 8 o'clock in the evening, depending on your social station and the decade. Between, so morning could stretch well into what you and I would consider late afternoon. The Victorians contained multitudes, and also a remarkably flexible definition of morning. But the preparation for these calls begins now. Hours before you'll actually depart the house, you must consider who should you visit, who visited you recently that you haven't yet reciprocated with a call of your own, who has snubbed you and should you snub them back or rise above it, who is new to the neighbourhood and must be welcomed or evaluated and possibly rejected. This is chess, not checkers. Every move matters. You retreat to your private sitting room, if you're fortunate enough to possess one, and retrieve your visiting book. This is a small ledger in which you record every call made and received, a social accounting system as meticulous as any banker's. You also retrieve your card case, a small, elegant container, often silver or mother of pearl, holding your calling cards. These cards are your currency. They are printed with your name and only your name. No address, no title beyond Mrs. or Miss, nothing so vulgar as actual information. And they follow rules so elaborate they could fill a book. In fact, they did fill books. Etiquette manuals of the Victorian era devoted entire chapters to the proper use of calling cards. Here's an intriguing detail historians enjoy highlighting. The way you folded the corner of your card communicated specific messages. A fold on the upper right corner meant you had delivered the card in person. A fold on the lower right indicated you were calling on the entire family. A fold on the lower left meant you were expressing condolences. A fold on the upper left signified congratulations. If you got these folds wrong, you could inadvertently inform a new mother you were sorry for her loss or congratulate someone at a funeral. The stakes could not be higher, or rather they could. Actual life and death situations did exist, but in the hothouse world of Victorian social climbing, a card folding error felt nearly as catastrophic. You dress for calling, which requires yet another change of clothes. This morning's dress won't suffice. For afternoon visits, you need something smarter, more polished. A visiting dress, perhaps in silk or fine wool with appropriate accessories. Your bonnet must be fresh. Your gloves must be spotless. The aroma of your perfume, something floral and restrained, violet or rosewater, must be detectable but not overwhelming. You check yourself in the mirror, adjusting the angle of your hat, and you see a woman armoured for social war. The carriage is brought around, or if your family doesn't maintain a carriage, you'll take a hired cab, or even walk, though walking was considered slightly less genteel. The street smells of horse, manure and coal smoke. The sounds of the city pressing against the windows, vendors shouting, wheels rattling, the occasional bark of a dog. You clutch your card case and review your mental list of targets. Your first call is on Mrs. Ashworth, a woman of impeccable reputation who lives 3 streets over in a house slightly larger than yours. The maid answers the door, and here begins the elaborate dance. You present your card on a small silver tray the maid holds out to you. You do not hand it to her directly. That would be vulgar. She takes the tray inside, and you wait. This is the moment of judgment. If Mrs. Ashworth is home, the servant will come back and lead you in. But being home is a social pretense, not a literal fact. Mrs. Ashworth could be physically in her house, seated in her parlour, eating bonbons, and still not be home to you. The expression means available to receive guests, and its reverse, not home, is a courteous untruth everyone agrees to uphold. If she's not home to you, you simply leave your calling card with its proper corner folded and go. No offence officially, but everyone understands, everyone takes note. If Mrs. Ashworth is consistently not home to you while welcoming other callers, the signal is clear. You've been evaluated, assessed, and found lacking. Today, though, the servant returns with a slight smile. You're welcomed. The parlour is warm, maybe too warm. The fire has been stoked in expectation of guests, and the atmosphere feels heavy and somewhat stagnant. The wallpaper is a stylish William Morris design, all twisting vines and blossoms, and the furniture is solid mahogany covered in velvet the shade of congealed blood. Mrs. Ashworth stands to welcome you, and you exchange the required courtesies. The climate, your wellness. Her wellness. The challenge of securing reliable help these days. Here's the reality about morning visits. They were meant to last precisely 15 minutes. Some manners guides specified as little as 10. You didn't sit until asked. You didn't take off your hat. That would imply you planned to linger, which was forward. You didn't bring up anything divisive, intimate, or truly compelling. The whole encounter was a display of appearances, a shared understanding that substance was unnecessary and potentially risky. Scholars continue debating what women really gained from these visits. Some researchers claim they were strictly oppressive, a device for forcing compliance and squandering women's hours on pointless ceremony. Others contend that morning visits served authentic social purposes. They enabled women to create networks, share intelligence, orchestrate matches for their offspring, and forge hierarchies of power in a society where they held scant formal authority. The reality is, likely both. The arrangement was monotonous and confining, but within its boundaries, resourceful women discovered methods to exercise genuine power. You engage in discourse. You taste the tea that's presented. Fragile porcelain, somewhat too warm. A subtle hint of bergamot. You compliment the fresh pillows. You reference, quite offhandedly, that your daughter has gotten yet another invitation to the Henderson gathering. Mrs. Ashworth's brows lift imperceptibly. Intelligence has been traded. Position has been communicated. The performance proceeds. Precisely 14 minutes after you entered, you stand to depart. Mrs. Ashworth doesn't object. She understands the conventions as thoroughly as you do. You trade commitments to gather again shortly, commitments neither of you will recall by the next day, and then you're outside once more, card holder in hand, prepared for the subsequent visit. 3 additional ones to complete this afternoon. By the moment you arrive home, you'll be drained in a manner that has nothing to do with bodily effort. Your expression will hurt from maintaining pleasantness. Your thoughts will hum with the arithmetic of who remarked what and what it signified and how to counter. This is your occupation. This is your existence, and nobody will ever compensate you a cent for it. The afternoon radiance angles through the parlour panes, dim and diluted, lighting the dust particles that float lazily through the space. You've come back from your visits, switched out of your calling costume into something marginally more relaxed, though relaxed is a qualified term when you're still bound in a corset. And now you settle into what society regards as your proper setting. The seat by the glass, a bit of needlecraft in your hands. Ah, needlecraft. The quintessential Victorian female occupation. The thing you've been practicing since you were capable of grasping a needle. The thing you'll continue practicing until your vision grows too weak to discern the stitches. Your digits find the accustomed pattern almost unconsciously. Needle upward, thread across, needle downward, while your thoughts drift to countless other locations. This is contemplation, Victorian fashion. This is also, if we're being frank, an extremely elaborate method of demonstrating you have nothing more productive to occupy yourself. The embroidery frame in your grasp contains a partially completed work, a cluster of roses on ivory linen intended to become a fireplace panel or a pillow covering, or maybe just another article for the perpetual trousseau you've been compiling since youth. The thread is silk, coloured a rich scarlet that marks your fingertips faintly rose. The needle is steel, delicate as a murmur, and it reflects the light each moment you pull it higher. You can detect the linen itself, fresh, faintly starched, and below it the lavender pouch placed into your sewing container to discourage moths. Here's the reality about needlecraft. It wasn't merely a pastime, it was a declaration. A woman with gorgeously embroidered handkerchiefs, flawlessly stitched specimens and handcrafted lace trim on her undergarments was broadcasting something quite particular. She was conveying, I possess so much free time that I can invest hours producing strictly ornamental objects. She was conveying, my household is prosperous enough that I needn't labour for wages. She was conveying, I am skilled, cultured, and completely, absolutely worthless in any functional capacity. This was the objective. Worthlessness was the ambition. The notion of accomplishments controlled the upbringing of middle-ranking and upper-ranking Victorian girls. An accomplished young woman could perform on the piano. Not expertly well, naturally, because professional pianists laboured for wages, and we've confirmed how vulgar that would be, but charmingly, agreeably, sufficiently to amuse company. Following supper, she could vocalise again, charmingly, with a delicate soprano tone and suitable emotional control. She could sketch and render in watercolours, creating delightful landscapes and compositions that revealed refinement without drive. She could communicate in French, conceivably Italian, enough to interpret basic texts and insert expressions into dialogue. She could perform the sanctioned dances, she could generate refined casual conversation, and she could stitch, embroider, create lace, knit, crochet, work beads. Any and every textile craft that maintained hands occupied and minds appropriately vacant. You place your embroidery aside for an instant and extend your digits. They're beginning to stiffen. The fire snaps gently in the hearth, and somewhere in the dwelling a panel shuts with a remote thud. You ought to rehearse the piano. You've been disregarding it recently, and your mother by marriage delivered a pointed observation about it at supper last week. The piano rests in the angle of the chamber, a distinguished upright in buffed walnut, its keys yellowed somewhat with years. You don't especially desire to perform. You've never especially desired to perform. But accomplishments aren't about desiring. Here's an intriguing detail scholars enjoy noting. Numerous Victorian women invested so many hours on needlecraft that they acquired serious vision troubles and repetitive strain ailments. The mixture of delicate, detailed labour, inadequate lighting, gaslight was an enhancement over candles, but still considerably dimmer than contemporary electric illumination, and perpetual hours of identical movements exacted a real bodily cost. Some women became partially sightless from embroidery. Others acquired arthritis in their digits decades sooner than they ought to have. The refined feminine crafts were quietly demolishing bodies, one stitch at once. You retrieve the embroidery once more. What alternative do you have? The piano stays untouched for the present. Rather, your thoughts drift to the watercolour you experimented with last week. A perspective of the grounds, the roses in flower, the small stone seat where you occasionally rest on mild afternoons. It wasn't particularly successful. Your roses resembled cabbages, and your perspective was hopelessly confused. But it didn't require being successful. It required existing, being displayed to guests who would murmur courteous appreciation, being stored away in a portfolio that proved your cultivation. Scholars continue debating whether these accomplishments genuinely created happiness for women. Some researchers propose that numerous women authentically appreciated their needlecraft and music, discovering creative fulfillment and meditative tranquility in these pursuits. Others maintain that the compulsory nature of accomplishments, the manner they were mandated rather than selected, eliminated any real enjoyment and converted them into simply another variety of unpaid toil. The journals and correspondence that remain provide conflicting testimony. Some women recorded affectionately about their embroidery undertakings. Others communicated devastating tedium, aggravation, and a frantic yearning for something beyond. You are maybe somewhere intermediate. The pattern of the needle is calming. The roses are forming beneath your grasp, petal by silken petal. There's something gratifying about generating beauty, even beauty that nobody especially requires. But there's equally a voice in the rear of your consciousness, one you've mastered ignoring primarily, that murmurs about all the alternative things you could be accomplishing. Perusing something more demanding than the sanctioned novels, composing something of your own, studying something that signifies. You suppress the voice downward, you invariably do. The timepiece on the shelf sounds the half hour, a refined silver tone that appears to suspend in the atmosphere for an instant before dissolving. The radiance through the panes has altered, become somewhat more golden as the afternoon advances. You've been positioned here for almost 2 hours, and your spine hurts from the compelled upright stance, your shoulders rigid with tension you didn't detect building. A servant materializes in the entrance, the identical servant who ignited your fire this morning, though you scarcely acknowledge her features. She inquires if you'd prefer tea delivered in. You gestured affirmatively. Tea would be agreeable. Tea is invariably agreeable. It interrupts the perpetual hours, provides framework to the formless afternoon. While you pause, you raise your embroidery to scrutinize it. In the diminishing light, the roses are progressing satisfactorily. The scarlet thread radiates like minute droplets of blood against the ivory linen. You've been labouring on this work for 3 weeks presently, and you'll likely labour on it for 3 additional. When it's completed, it will accompany the other completed works in the linen cabinet, gorgeous, worthless, collecting dust. But it demonstrates something. It demonstrates you possess time to squander. It demonstrates you are an appropriate lady. And ultimately, isn't that all that signifies? You resume your stitches, needle upward, thread across, needle downward, as the afternoon gradually dissolves into dusk. The tea comes on a silver platform, and with it a quiet prompt that this dwelling doesn't operate itself. The servant positions the vessel, the cups, the modest plate of biscuits, and withdraws with a murmured question. "Will you be examining the accounts today, ma'am?" You gesture yes, placing aside your embroidery with something that seems almost like relief. The roses can pause. There is genuine labour to be accomplished. This is the aspect of Victorian womanhood that seldom appears in the sentimental novels. The aspect where you are not a fragile blossom, but a commander directing an army. If you are the mistress of a dwelling, even a humble one, you are accountable for a modest empire of logistics, finance, and human administration that would cause a contemporary CEO to flinch. The needlecraft and piano performing are what you present the society. This, the ledgers, the keys, the perpetual negotiations, is what maintains the society rotating. You transfer to the modest writing table in the angle of the chamber, the one with the secured compartment where you preserve the household accounts. The key suspends from a chatelaine at your waist, an ornamental chain that contains all the keys to your domestic realm: the tea container, the sugar container, the wine cellar, the linen cabinet, the silver cabinet. These keys are emblems of your jurisdiction, and also quite practical requirements. Theft was a persistent worry in Victorian dwellings, not because servants were naturally dishonest, but because destitution rendered temptation severe. A few spoonfuls of tea or sugar, extracted regularly, could be vended or exchanged, so everything valuable remained secured and the keys remained with you. The ledger rests open before you, its sheets covered in tidy columns of numbers. Butcher, 2 shillings, 6pence. Produce seller, 1 shilling, 8pence. Coal dealer, 8 shillings. Candles, soap, bluing for the washing, postal stamps, a fresh broom to substitute the one that ultimately surrendered its existence. Every cent that enters or exits this dwelling passes through these sheets, and every cent must be justified. Your spouse may generate the wages, but you expend it, and you must expend it prudently or confront his dissatisfaction and your own private humiliation. Here's an intriguing detail scholars enjoy noting. Numerous Victorian domestic guides suggested that the mistress examine every shipment personally, verifying weights and quantities against what was requested. Merchants were presumed to be deceiving you at every chance, underweighing the meat, watering the milk, dispatching yesterday's bread at today's costs. Whether this suspicion was warranted is questionable, but the consequence was that middle-ranking women invested considerable time essentially auditing their provisions, armed with scales and mistrustful attitudes. You detect the cook's substantial footsteps on the stairs. She's approaching for the daily conference. This is another ceremony, as established as morning devotions. Each day, you and the cook must organise the menus for the subsequent day, review what requires ordering, examine what's remaining in the pantry. The cook is an imposing woman named Mrs. Brandt, who has been with the household for 15 years and comprehends far more about operating this kitchen than you ever shall. But she cannot function without your jurisdiction. You possess the keys. You regulate the finances. The pretense of your mastery must be preserved. Mrs. Brandt enters with a modest curtsy and commences her account. The beef is almost exhausted, the potatoes are sprouting. There's adequate flour for the week, but the sugar is diminishing. You've hosted too numerous guests recently, too numerous teas. She speaks in a subdued, productive tone, and the aroma of the kitchen adheres to her. Onions, roasting meat, wood smoke, and something yeasty from the bread developing in the warmth of the range. You attend, gesture, record notes in your ledger. Tomorrow you'll require ordering additional sugar. The butcher should transport a leg of mutton on Thursday. The fishmonger arrives on Friday, and you'll desire something fresh for supper. This negotiation consumes almost half an hour. By the conclusion, you've organised 4 days of meals, sanctioned 3 distinct deliveries, and quietly overturned Mrs. Brandt's proposal of oysters for Saturday. Too costly this month, though you don't state so openly. You suggest concerns about freshness. She comprehends the reality, but accepts the courteous pretence. You both preserve your honour. The servants are subsequent. A properly operated Victorian dwelling demanded constant administration of personnel, and the mistress was anticipated to supervise everything from their labour timetables to their moral condition. You must guarantee the maids are executing their responsibilities properly, which signifies periodic examinations of their labour, operating a white-gloved digit along mantelpieces, verifying that the silver has been buffed, assessing the condition of the linens. You must administer conflicts between personnel members who reside and labour in intimate quarters and unavoidably cultivate resentments, partnerships, and intricate personal dynamics. You must employ fresh servants when required, a procedure involving interviews, character testimonials, and cautious assessment of whether this stranger can be relied upon inside your dwelling. Scholars continue debating the character of mistress-servant associations. Some researchers depict a picture of reciprocal regard and even fondness, with devoted servants who remained with households for generations and were regarded almost as extended household members. Others highlight the inherent manipulation, the minimal wages, the extended hours, the absence of privacy or independence. The manner servants were anticipated to be concurrently invisible and perpetually accessible. The reality fluctuated tremendously depending on the dwelling. Some mistresses were compassionate, some were harsh. Most were simply occupied, viewing servants as necessary implements rather than completely realised human creatures. Recall that servant who ignited your fire this morning, the one whose features you scarcely acknowledged. She possesses a name. She possesses a household somewhere, presumably, and aspirations she's never disclosed to anyone. She's been on her feet for almost 12 hours presently, and she won't cease until after supper is presented and removed. You don't contemplate this, you cannot afford to contemplate this. If you commenced perceiving servants as individuals with complete interior existences, the entire arrangement would become intolerable. The radiance is diminishing presently, the afternoon sliding toward dusk. You shut your ledger, secure it back in the compartment, and sense the gratifying weight of the keys against your hip. The dwelling is in sequence. The accounts stabilize, the meals are organized, the servants understand their responsibilities. You have satisfied your function as domestic commander, invisible commander of an invisible army, and nobody beyond these boundaries will ever comprehend or value the labour involved. Your spouse, when he arrives home, will observe only if something fails, if supper is delayed, if the dwelling is frigid, if a button is absent from his shirt. He will not observe the hours of organising that caused everything to operate smoothly. That's the character of domestic administration. Success is invisible. Only breakdown gets perceived. You stand from the table, extending somewhat, sensing the corset shift against your ribs. There are still hours remaining before supper. Maybe you'll resume your embroidery. Maybe you'll rest your vision for an instant, though ladies don't nap. They simply recline for a brief interval. The dwelling hums quietly surrounding you, a mechanism you've wound and initiated into motion, ticking along toward dusk. But let's step outside for an instant. Let's abandon the quiet parlour, the ledgers and keys, the regulated realm of domestic administration. Let's walk through the streets of a Victorian city, London, Manchester, Birmingham, any of the substantial industrial centres, and locate the other women, the ones who never studied embroidery because they were too occupied attempting not to starve. You are no longer the mistress. You are no longer the servant. You are something else completely presently. A factory worker, maybe, or a seamstress, or a shop attendant. Your hands are not gentle, your costume is not silk, and your day resembles nothing like the refined timetables we've been observing. The factory alarm sounds at 6 in the morning, though in winter it's still completely dark, and you've already walked 2 miles through streets that reek of waste and horse manure, and the specific acrid quality of coal smoke that never completely departs the atmosphere in industrial cities. Your boots, the sole pair you possess, leak somewhat at the joints, and your feet have been damp since yesterday. The cold has settled into your bones like a tenant who refuses to contribute rent. You pull your shawl tighter, surrounding your shoulders, and merge with the current of other women flowing toward the mill. The mill. It towers ahead of you, an enormous brick structure with rows of panes that illuminate faintly with gaslight. The sound reaches you before you're even through the entrance, a thunderous, rhythmic roar of machinery that will occupy your ears for the subsequent 12 hours. Looms crash and rattle. Spindles whirl. The whole structure appears to vibrate with mechanical life. And below it all, you can sense the floor trembling under your feet. Inside, the atmosphere is dense with cotton particles. It covers your tongue, occupies your nostrils, settles into your lungs with every breath. The flavour is dry and somewhat sweet, deceptively harmless for something so hazardous. Here's an intriguing detail scholars enjoy noting. Cotton mill labourers acquired a condition called byssinosis, or brown lung, from years of inhaling these particles. Manifestations included chest constriction, coughing and difficulty breathing, and the illness was so prevalent it was simply acknowledged as aspect of the occupation. Labourers called it Monday fever, because manifestations were most severe at the commencement of the labour week, after a day of rest had partially cleared their lungs. You assume your position at your mechanism. You're a spinner accountable for tending several spinning frames simultaneously, walking persistently between them to repair broken threads, substitute empty bobbins, and guarantee the cotton flows smoothly. The labour is not especially skilled, but it demands relentless attention. A moment's distraction and the thread tangles. The mechanism jams, and the supervisor, the man who oversees your section, approaches to yell at you over the noise, or worse. The heat is oppressive. Textile mills were maintained deliberately warm and humid to prevent the cotton from becoming brittle and breaking. So even in winter, you're labouring in temperatures that cause sweat to trickle down your spine and plaster your hair to your forehead. The smell is a complicated mixture. Mechanism oil, raw cotton, human bodies pressed too near together, and the faint iron quality of the machinery itself. Your costume clings to your skin. Your digits, persistently moving, become slick and clumsy. You will be here until 6 in the evening. 12 hours with maybe 2 brief breaks for meals you've transported from home. Bread, maybe some cheese if you're fortunate. Cold tea in a tin container. There are no seats at your station. You stand the complete time or walk, your feet hurting on the hard floor. By the conclusion of the shift, your legs will throb with a dull, persistent pain that has become so accustomed you scarcely observe it anymore. Some scholars debate whether factory labour was genuinely worse than domestic service or agricultural labour. There's still discussion among researchers about the relative hardships. Factory hours were brutal, yes, but at least they were established. A factory worker knew when her workday concluded. A domestic servant was technically available 24 hours a day. And farm labour, before industrialisation, had its own punishing patterns tied to seasons and harvests. The reality is that all these varieties of labour were harsh, and comparing them is somewhat like debating which circle of hell is least disagreeable. But the factory had its own specific horrors. The mechanisms were hazardous. Exposed gears, spinning belts, rollers that could capture a loose sleeve or a strand of hair and pull you in before you could scream. Accidents were prevalent. Digits were lost. Arms were crushed. Children, and yes, children laboured in these mills. Some as young as 5 or 6 were dispatched to crawl beneath the mechanisms to collect loose cotton. Their small bodies fitting into spaces adults couldn't reach. Some of them never crawled out. You attempt not to contemplate this. You maintain your eyes on your labour. The pattern of the mechanisms becomes a kind of hypnosis, a trance condition that carries you through the perpetual hours. Or maybe you're not in a factory at all. Maybe you're a seamstress, one of the thousands of women who laboured in the slop trade, cheap, ready-produced clothing manufactured in cramped workshops or, increasingly, in your own dwelling. You sit in a tiny chamber, hunched over a shirt or a pair of trousers, stitching by the radiance of a single candle because you cannot afford the gas. Your eyes hurt. Your spine screams. You've been sewing since dawn, and you'll continue sewing until you physically cannot perceive the stitches anymore. Seamstresses were compensated by the piece, a few pennies per shirt, per pair of trousers, per completed garment. To generate enough to survive, you had to manufacture volume, which signified labouring 18 or 20 hours a day during occupied seasons. The term sweated labour was invented for precisely this kind of labour that extracted every droplet of energy from your body in exchange for barely adequate finances to eat. And during slow seasons, there was no labour at all, which signified no finances, which signified hunger. Or maybe you're a shop worker standing behind a counter in one of the fresh department stores, vending gloves or ribbons or handkerchiefs to ladies who look directly through you. Your feet are planted on the hard floor. Shops rarely provided seats for female employees, and you've been smiling for 7 hours straight. The manager observes persistently, prepared to reduce your compensation if you sit down, if you frown, if you fail to preserve the pleasant pretense that you exist strictly to serve. These women existed parallel existences to the ladies in their parlours. They walked the identical streets, breathed the identical smoky atmosphere, existed in the identical city at the identical instant, but their realms barely contacted. A factory worker might pass a lady's carriage and smell, for just an instant, the faint scent of rosewater drifting from the pane. A seamstress might stitch a costume she could never afford to wear. A shop worker might hand a customer a purchase worth more than her monthly wages. The gap between them was not just finances. It was a different comprehension of what a day signified, what a body was for, what survival demanded. And yet they were all women. They were all Victorian. They were all trapped in different manners by the identical rigid society. Now, let's discuss children. Specifically, let's discuss what occurred when you had them. Because in Victorian England, having children was essentially your primary occupation description if you were a woman, and yet the experience of motherhood varied so dramatically between ranks that it might as well have been two different activities completely. If you're back in the comfortable realm of the middle-ranking mistress, you've likely been pregnant multiple occasions by presently. The average Victorian household had between 5 and 7 children, though numerous women gave birth far more frequently than that. 10, 12, 15 pregnancies were not uncommon, though not all of those children survived infancy. You learned early to hold your affection loosely, to not become too attached to a fresh baby until it had weathered its first year. The aroma of the nursery was sweet milk and talcum powder, but underneath it, invariably the faint shadow of loss. Childbirth itself was hazardous, genuinely hazardous. Maternal mortality rates in Victorian England hovered around 5 deaths per 1,000 births, which sound modest until you recall that each woman might give birth numerous occasions, and each birth was another roll of the dice. Puerperal fever, infection contracted during or following delivery, killed thousands of women, numerous of them young, numerous of them otherwise healthy. Physicians didn't yet comprehend germ theory, and they transferred from patient to patient, from autopsy table to birthing bed, without washing their hands. The very individuals meant to assist you might be the ones who killed you. But let's say you survived. Let's say the baby is healthy, pink, and squalling in the arms of the monthly nurse, a specialised caregiver employed just for the first weeks following birth. What occurs subsequently depends completely on your social position. If you're wealthy, you will barely contact this child. That sounds severe, and maybe it is, but it was also simply the reality of upper-ranking Victorian parenting. The baby goes to a wet nurse or is fed with one of the fresh, rubber-nippled bottles, if you're progressive and somewhat reckless. The baby sleeps in the nursery, and completely separate domain at the summit of the dwelling, supervised by a nurse and later a nursery maid. You might visit for an hour in the afternoon. Tea time in the nursery was a charming ceremony, but the genuine labour of childcare is handled by servants. Here's an intriguing detail scholars enjoy noting. Some Victorian children saw their mothers so infrequently that they felt closer to their nurses than to their genuine parents. Memoirs from the period describe children running to nurse for comfort following a fall, nurse knowing their favourite foods and secret fears, nurse being the one who held them when they cried at night. The mother was a distant, gorgeous figure who appeared occasionally in silk and perfume, examined their clothes and manners, and then vanished again to the adult realm below. This wasn't cruelty, it was simply how things were accomplished. A lady could not be anticipated to wipe noses and change nappies. That would render her common, would drag her down to the level of servants. Her occupation was to administer the dwelling, preserve social connections, and manufacture heirs. The actual raising of those children was handed off like everything else in their world. But descend the social ladder and everything transforms entirely. If you're a factory girl with an infant, there is no nurse, there is no nursery. There is only you and the brutal arithmetic of staying alive. You cannot stop working. Your wages are critical, frequently the only barrier between your family and the workhouse. But you cannot bring an infant to the mill. The machines would destroy it. And anyway, babies are not permitted. So, what do you do? Some women left their infants with relatives, a grandmother, an older sister, anyone who could manage the time. Others paid baby minders, women who ran makeshift childcare businesses out of their tiny homes, watching a dozen babies at once for a few pennies each week. The standard of this care ranged wildly. Some minders were gentle and capable, others were careless or darker. The phrase baby farmer entered the Victorian language to describe women who accepted infants for payment, and then, through neglect or intentional harm, ensured those infants quietly perished. It was less expensive than raising them. You try not to dwell on this as you hand your infant over each morning, pressing your lips to that delicate forehead, inhaling the milky scent of your child, and then turning away to walk to the factory. Your arms feel hollow all day, your breasts throb with unused milk, and somewhere in the depths of your mind, a dread hums continuously. Is she safe? Is she crying? Will she still recognize me when I return home? Some historians debate whether working-class mothers were genuinely more engaged with their children. Despite these separations, there's still debate among scholars about the quality versus quantity of parental time. A wealthy mother might spend only an hour daily with her children, but that hour was peaceful and concentrated, while a poor mother might spend more hours total but be depleted, scattered, stretched impossibly thin. Which children were better off? The question has no simple answer. The middle ground was perhaps the most challenging. If you were lower middle class, a clerk's wife perhaps, or a shopkeeper's, you might have only one servant or none whatsoever. You did your own childcare and your own housework and your own cooking, and the pressure was tremendous. You were expected to maintain middle-class standards of cleanliness, education and respectability, but without the staff to help you accomplish them. Your hands were chapped from washing, your back ached from carrying children, and you couldn't complain because complaint was unladylike. There's a particular weariness that comes from caring for small children. You know it, if you've ever done it, the way they need you, constantly, endlessly, with a hunger that never seems to satisfy. Victorian mothers knew this weariness intimately, whether they were rich or poor. The wealthy mother might retreat to her sitting room, handing the crying infant to nurse. But she still lay awake at night, wondering if she was doing enough, being enough. The poor mother had no retreat at all. The infant always in her arms or at her feet, or crying from the cradle in the corner of the one room where the entire family lived. And beneath all of it, the sorrow. So many children died. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough. Diseases that we vaccinate against now tore through nurseries and slums alike. 1 in 5 children died before their 5th birthday. 1 in 5. The arithmetic of love in Victorian England always included this dark variable, this shadow at the edge of every cradle. You learned to keep moving. You had no other option. The clock strikes 1. And somewhere in the house a gong sounds quietly, the signal for luncheon. You rise from your embroidery or your accounts or wherever the morning has left you and make your way to the dining room. But don't expect anything resembling the elaborate theatre of breakfast. Luncheon is a quieter matter, almost an afterthought in the Victorian day, and for once you might find yourself genuinely alone. The dining room feels different. At midday, the heavy curtains are drawn back to let in whatever pale light the sky provides, and the fire has been allowed to burn lower, casting a gentle warmth rather than the fierce heat of morning. The table is set for 1, your husband is at his office, the children are in the nursery with their governess, and any guests from this morning have long since left. It's just you and the soft clink of silverware and the distant sounds of a household functioning along without your direct supervision. Luncheon itself is modest, cold meat, perhaps remaining from last night's dinner, a slice of pie, some bread and butter, a bit of cheese. The Victorians didn't invest much ritual in this meal. It was fuel, not spectacle. And the food reflects that practicality. You eat without rushing, tasting the salt of the ham, the slight tang of the cheddar, the soft give of bread that was baked fresh this morning. In the kitchen below, a glass of water sits beside your plate, or perhaps a small glass of sherry if you're feeling slightly daring. Nobody is watching, nobody is judging. This is rare. This is valuable. Here's something the etiquette books didn't often acknowledge. Victorian women, especially those of the middle and upper classes, were almost never truly alone. Servants moved through the house constantly. Husbands expected attention. Children needed supervision, or at least management. Social obligations filled every available hour. The idea of solitude, genuine, uninterrupted solitude, was something of a privilege, and luncheon was one of the few moments it might be found. You finish your meal and push the plate aside. The maid will clear it later. For now, you have perhaps an hour, maybe two, before the afternoon calls begin or the next round of duties claims you. What do you do with this fragment of freedom? Some women read. The Victorian era was a golden age of the novel, and respectable women consumed fiction with an appetite that sometimes concerned moralists. You might have a book tucked away in your sitting room, something by Dickens, perhaps, or one of the Bronte sisters, or the scandalous sensation novels that everyone pretended to disapprove of while secretly reading under the covers. The pages smell of paper and ink, slightly musty. If the book is old and you lose yourself in someone else's story for a blessed little while. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Lending libraries were enormously popular in Victorian England, and many catered specifically to women readers. Moody's Select Library was the most famous, offering subscriptions that allowed members to borrow books without the expense of purchasing them. The library's founder, Charles Moody, personally vetted every title for moral suitability, which meant that anything too provocative or controversial was quietly excluded. His tastes shaped an entire generation's reading habits, and authors who wanted commercial success learned to write within his boundaries. But perhaps you don't want to read. Perhaps you want to write. Victorian women wrote constantly. Letters, diaries, journals, and sometimes secretly things meant for publication. Your writing desk holds paper and ink, and the scratch of the pen against the page is a sound you know intimately. You might be writing to your sister, describing the monotony of yesterday's morning calls. You might be recording your private thoughts in a diary locked with a tiny key. Or you might be working on something more ambitious. A novel, a book of poetry, an essay hidden in a drawer where no one will discover it. Women writers in Victorian England faced enormous obstacles. There's still debate among historians about exactly how much prejudice they encountered. Some argue that female authors were actively suppressed, while others point to the many successful women writers of the period as evidence that the barriers were not insurmountable. The truth seems to be that women could publish, but often had to use male pseudonyms or remain anonymous to be taken seriously. The Bronte sisters became the Bell brothers. Mary Ann Evans became George Eliot. The message was, words might be worthy, but your womanhood was a liability. You set down your pen and flex your fingers. The ink has left a small stain on your middle finger, a mark of this private work. Outside the window, the light has shifted, grown slightly greyer as clouds drift across the sun. You can hear the faint rumble of carriage wheels on the street below, the cry of a vendor selling something. Chestnuts, perhaps, or hot potatoes. The world continues its business, indifferent to your small rebellion of solitude. Some women use these quiet hours to rest, and here we must be careful because respectable Victorian ladies did not nap. Napping was for invalids, children, and the lower classes. But lying down, that was different. A lady might lie down for half an hour to rest her eyes, to recover from the morning's exertions, to gather strength for the afternoon ahead. This was not sleeping. This was merely horizontal contemplation. The bedroom calls to you now, the bed still made from this morning, but somehow inviting with its layers of quilts and pillows. You remove your shoes, just your shoes, nothing more, and recline against the cushions, staring up at the ceiling. The corset makes true relaxation impossible, but you've grown so accustomed to its presence that you barely notice anymore. Your body knows how to rest within its cage. The sounds of the house filter in, distant and muted. A door closing somewhere, footsteps on the stairs, the low murmur of voices from the kitchen. The fire in the grate has burned down to embers and the room is cooling slightly, but the blankets hold warmth and your eyelids are growing heavy. Despite your best intentions, you're not sleeping, you're resting. The distinction matters to no one but yourself, and perhaps not even then. What matters is this moment of stillness, this pause in the relentless machinery of the day. Your breath slows, your muscles unclench just slightly. The weight of expectation lifts, if only for a few minutes, and you float in a space between duty and duty, obligation and obligation. The clock will chime soon. The afternoon will resume its demands, but for now, in this grey midday light, you belong only to yourself. Somewhere outside, a bird is singing. A blackbird, perhaps, or a thrush, its melody threading through the urban noise like a memory of countryside you haven't seen in years. The sound is unexpectedly sweet. You listen, and you rest, and you let the world wait. It will still be there when you rise. The rest has done you good. You rise from the bed, smooth your skirts, and check your reflection in the mirror. Slightly flushed cheeks, a few stray hairs to be tucked back into place, but presentable. The afternoon stretches ahead, and today you have an outing planned. Today you're going shopping. Now, shopping in Victorian England was not the casual errand it might be today. You didn't pop out to grab a few things. You didn't browse casually on your lunch break. Shopping, especially for a respectable middle-class woman, was a carefully orchestrated social performance, surrounded by rules and expectations that could make a simple purchase feel like navigating a diplomatic summit. For most of history, respectable women did not shop in person at all. Goods were ordered through tradespeople who came to the house, or servants were sent to make purchases on your behalf. The idea of a lady walking into a shop, handling merchandise, bargaining over prices. It was faintly scandalous, suggestive of a woman who didn't have servants to do such things for her. The streets were dirty, crowded, full of unsuitable people. Why would you expose yourself to all that? But then came the department store. The mid-Victorian era saw the rise of these magnificent retail palaces, Selfridges, Harrods, Liberty, and dozens of smaller imitators, and they changed everything. Suddenly shopping became respectable. More than respectable, it became fashionable. The department store offered a new kind of public space where women could go without chaperones, spend hours without raising eyebrows, and participate in consumer culture in a way that had previously been denied to them. You step out of your house and into the street, the air hits you immediately. That particular Victorian city smell of coal smoke, horse manure, damp stone, and something indefinably human. The street is busy despite the hour, carriages rattling past, pedestrians weaving between them, a crossing sweeper clearing a path through the muck for ladies who don't want to soil their hems. You gather your skirts carefully and make your way toward the omnibus stop. Or perhaps you're fortunate enough to take the family carriage. The department store rises before you like a secular cathedral. The windows are vast, filled with artful displays of merchandise. Bolts of silk in jewel colours, gloves arranged in perfect fans, hats perched on stands like exotic birds. The doors are polished brass, and a uniformed doorman touches his cap as you enter. Inside, the space opens up into an atrium of light and marble, galleries rising on all sides, filled with more goods than you could examine in a lifetime. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Department stores were deliberately designed to be disorienting. The layout encouraged wandering, getting lost, stumbling upon departments you hadn't intended to visit. There were no windows on the shopping floors to remind you of the passage of time. The lighting was carefully calibrated to make merchandise look its best. Everything was arranged to keep you inside, spending for as long as possible. The Victorians invented retail psychology long before anyone gave it that name. The smell inside is complex and rather intoxicating. Perfume from the cosmetics counter mingles with the clean, slightly chemical scent of new fabric. Leather goods contribute their rich, earthy notes. Somewhere nearby, a display of soaps offers lavender, rose, sandalwood. The air itself feels expensive, curated, designed to make you believe that buying something here will make you a better, more beautiful, more worthy person. You wander through the glove department, trailing your fingers over kidskin and suede. A shop assistant approaches, young, neatly dressed, professionally pleasant, and asks if she can help you. You decline for now, just looking, and she retreats with a practiced smile. This is permitted here. In a traditional shop, you would be expected to buy something, and browsing without purchasing would be considered rude or suspicious. But the department store has changed the rules. Looking is encouraged. Touching is allowed. The merchandise wants to be handled, admired, desired. You try on a pair of gloves. They slide over your hands like a second skin, butter soft, the colour of fresh cream. The shop assistant holds up a mirror so you can see how they look, murmuring appropriate compliments. You don't actually need new gloves. You have at least 8 pairs at home. But these are so pretty, so perfectly made, and the price is not unreasonable. And wouldn't they look lovely with your blue walking dress? This is how they get you. Shopping at a department store was not simply about acquiring necessities. Historians still argue about exactly what function these stores served in Victorian women's lives. Some scholars suggest they provided a rare form of public freedom, a space where women could move independently, make decisions, exercise a form of economic power, even if the money technically belonged to their husbands. Others argue that department stores simply created new forms of consumption-based identity, teaching women that their worth was tied to what they purchased and displayed. The freedom to shop was still in the end a freedom defined by spending. You buy the gloves? Of course you do. The assistant wraps them in tissue paper and places them in a small cardboard box printed with the store's name. You'll carry this box home like a trophy, physical proof of your participation in this great consumer ritual. But shopping is not only about the merchandise, it's also about being seen. The department store has a tea room naturally, an elegant space with white tablecloths and potted palms and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. You take a table by the window, order tea and a small cake, and settle in to watch the parade. Other women pass by, their packages clutched in gloved hands, their dresses advertising their taste and their budget. You recognise a few faces, acquaintances from morning calls, a neighbour's daughter, the wife of your husband's business associate. Nods are exchanged, small waves. The social mapping continues, even here in this temple of commerce. The tea is good, strong and hot, served in delicate china that feels almost weightless in your hand. The cake is excellent, a Victoria sponge, appropriately enough, with jam and cream that tastes of summer even in the grey heart of winter. You eat slowly, watching the shoppers flow past, and you feel something you rarely feel, almost anonymous. Nobody here knows your entire history. Nobody is keeping track of your social debts. You're just another woman with a small box of gloves and an hour to spare. This is why women came to department stores even when they had nothing particular to buy. This is why they lingered in the tea rooms, wandered the galleries, sat in the reading rooms that some stores provided. The department store offered a respite from the relentless intimacy of Victorian social life, a place to be alone in public, to exist without being scrutinised by people who knew you. You finish your tea. The light outside is beginning to shift toward the golden tones of late afternoon. You should go home. There's dinner to oversee, letters to write, the endless wheel of domestic duty waiting to claim you again. But you allow yourself one more circuit of the store, one more drift through the silk ribbons and the leather-bound books and the displays of artificial flowers, so realistic you have to touch them to confirm they're not real. The gloves in their box are warm against your side, a small indulgence, a minor act of self-creation. Tonight, when you undress for bed, you'll take them out and try them on again, admiring them in the gaslight, feeling for just a moment like someone who chose something for herself. It's a small rebellion, but it's yours. The gloves are tucked away now, and the afternoon has taken on a different character. The frivolity of shopping has passed, and in its place comes something more serious, or at least something that wishes to appear serious. You have charitable duties to attend to, and they will not wait. Charity, was the great moral imperative of the Victorian middle-class woman. If you had leisure, if you had resources, if you enjoyed the comforts of a well-run household and a respectable position in society, then you owed something to those less fortunate. This was not optional, it was expected, enforced by social pressure as binding as any law. A woman who did not participate in charitable work was a woman whose soul was suspect. So you put on your visiting clothes again. Remember, you've already changed twice today, and the afternoon isn't over, and you prepare to venture into the less pleasant parts of the city. Your destination today is a tenement building in one of the poorer districts, where you and several other ladies from your church have been conducting what is called district visiting. You go among the poor, you bring them things, you attempt to improve them. The carriage takes you to the edge of the respectable world and deposits you there with instructions to return in 2 hours. From here you walk, because carriages cannot navigate the narrow alleys and crowded courts where the poor actually live. The transition is immediate and jarring. One moment you're on a broad, clean street with shops and respectable pedestrians. The next you're stepping over open drains, dodging puddles of questionable origin, trying not to breathe too deeply. The smell hits you first. It always does. Human waste, rotting garbage, unwashed bodies, the sour tang of poverty itself. The buildings rise on either side, blocking what little light the afternoon offers, and the walls seem to lean inward, pressing close. Laundry hangs from lines strung between windows, grey and limp, never quite drying in this sunless air. Children play in the gutters, barefoot, ragged, their faces smeared with dirt. They stare at you as you pass, this strange creature in silk and kid gloves, moving through their world like a visitor from another planet. You feel the weight of their eyes. You always do. The family you're visiting today lives on the 3rd floor of a building that should probably have been condemned years ago. The stairs creak alarmingly under your feet and the banister wobbles when you touch it. You smell cabbage cooking somewhere, and beneath it, the mustier scent of damp walls and rotting wood. A baby is crying in one of the rooms you pass, a thin, exhausted sound that seems to have no beginning or end. Mrs. Henley answers your knock. She's a thin woman, older than she should be, you know. She's barely 30, but she looks 50, worn down by childbirth and poverty and the relentless grind of keeping a family alive on almost nothing. Her dress is patched, her hands red and rough, and her eyes hold a wariness you've come to recognise, the look of someone being helped by people who might also be judging her. You step inside. The room is small, one room for the entire family, which includes Mrs. Henley, her husband when he's not at the docks, and 4 surviving children. There's a bed in one corner, a table in another, and a small coal fire struggling to provide heat. The window is stuffed with rags to keep out the draught. Everything smells of smoke and bodies and the particular staleness of air that hasn't circulated properly in years. You've brought a basket. This is what you do as a district visitor. You bring baskets. Inside this one, a loaf of bread, some tea, a bit of sugar, a blanket that was too worn for your household but still serviceable. You present these items with what you hope is grace, and Mrs. Henley accepts them with what you hope is gratitude. The transaction is awkward for both of you, fraught with power imbalances that neither of you can name. Here's a curious detail historians love to note. Victorian charity was almost never unconditional. When you brought your basket, you also brought expectations. You expected the poor to be grateful, of course, but more than that, you expected them to improve, to stop drinking, to attend church, to keep their homes cleaner, their children better behaved, their morals more aligned with middle-class standards. Charity came with strings attached, and the strings were often made of judgment. You sit with Mrs. Henley for half an hour. You ask about her children, her husband's work, her health. You offer advice, perhaps too much advice, about diet, about cleanliness, about the importance of sending the children to the charity school. Mrs. Henley nods and agrees with everything you say. and you cannot tell if she means it or if she's simply performing the role of grateful recipient, because that's what keeps the baskets coming. You're both actors in a play neither of you wrote. Some historians argue that Victorian charity did genuine good. There's still discussion among scholars about the net effect of all this district visiting, these baskets and blankets and moral lectures. On one hand, material aid helped families survive. The bread you brought will feed those children tonight, and the blanket will keep someone warm. On the other hand, the condescension built into the system often did harm, reinforcing class hierarchies and making the poor feel lesser, scrutinised, eternally indebted. Some poor families hated the visitors. They submitted to the visits because refusing meant losing access to resources, but they resented every moment. You sense this resentment in Mrs. Henley, though she hides it well. Or perhaps you're imagining it, projecting your own discomfort onto her. You've never been entirely sure what good you're doing here, whether your visits make any real difference or simply make you feel better about your own comfortable life. But you keep coming because this is what respectable women do. This is how you earn your place in heaven, or at least your place in society. Remember the factory girls from earlier, the seamstresses with their endless stitching, the shop assistants on their aching feet. Some of them are Mrs. Henley. Some of them will become Mrs. Henley if illness or accident or simple bad luck knocks them down. The distance between working poor and destitute poor was terrifyingly small. One lost job, one sick child, one husband who drank his wages, and suddenly you were the one accepting baskets from ladies who smelled of rosewater and pity. You rise to leave. Mrs. Henley thanks you again, and you press her hand with what you hope is genuine warmth. The children have gathered around the basket, eyeing the bread with undisguised hunger, and you feel a stab of something. Guilt, perhaps, or grief, or just the unbearable weight of a world where some children go hungry while others learn embroidery. The stairs creak again as you descend. The alley smells no better than it did an hour ago, and the children are still playing in the gutter, still barefoot, still staring. You make your way back toward the edge of respectability, where your carriage waits to carry you home. The streets grow cleaner as you walk, the buildings grow taller, the windows larger, the air slightly less foul. By the time you reach the carriage, you could almost forget where you've been, almost convince yourself that the world is orderly and fair and that your little basket made a difference. Almost. The driver helps you up and you settle back against the cushions with a sigh. Your feet are tired, your heart is heavy. The basket you carried in is empty now, left behind with the Henleys, and you'll refill it next week and do this all over again. This is your duty. This is your virtue. This is the bargain Victorian society has struck with its women. You cannot work, cannot earn, cannot vote, but you can give, you can visit, you can help within limits in ways that don't threaten the order of things. The carriage rocks gently as it carries you home, and you close your eyes against the fading light. The carriage delivers you home just as the clock strikes 4, and not a moment too soon. The afternoon is about to reach its most sacred hour, the hour of tea. And today you are not merely drinking tea alone in your sitting room. Today you are hosting, which means the stakes are considerably higher. Afternoon tea as a formal institution was still relatively new in the Victorian era. The credit usually goes to Anna Maria Russell, the Duchess of Bedford, who sometime in the 1840s began requesting a tray of tea and light refreshments in the late afternoon to bridge the gap between luncheon and the increasingly late dinner hour. What started as a private indulgence became a social phenomenon, spreading through the upper classes and eventually trickling down to anyone with pretensions of gentility. By the time you're living through it, afternoon tea is an institution as fixed and ceremonial as morning prayers. You have approximately 30 minutes to prepare before your guests arrive. This is not enough time. It is never enough time, but it will have to do. You check your appearance in the hallway mirror. A little windswept from the carriage ride, perhaps, but presentable. A quick adjustment of your hair, a dab of rose water on your wrists, and you're ready to inspect the drawing room. The servants have been busy. The fire is built up to a welcoming blaze, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The best china has been laid out on the tea table, delicate cups painted with roses, a matching teapot, the silver sugar tongs your mother gave you as a wedding present. The smell of the room is warm and expectant, coal smoke, furniture polish, and the faint ghost of the hothouse flowers arranged on the mantelpiece. Everything is as it should be, but the food. That's where reputations are made, or broken. Afternoon tea was not simply tea, it was a carefully curated display of hospitality, a miniature feast designed to impress without appearing to try too hard. The table before you holds thin sandwiches with the crusts removed, cucumber, egg and cress, potted meat cut into precise rectangles. There are scones, still warm from the oven, accompanied by clotted cream and strawberry preserves. There are small cakes, naturally, and perhaps some madeleines or petite fours if your cook is feeling ambitious. Everything is bite-sized, elegant, meant to be consumed without visible effort or appetite. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The bread for tea sandwiches was supposed to be cut so thin you could almost read through it. This required not only skill, but also a very sharp knife and a particular type of bread, dense, fine, crumbed, capable of being sliced without crumbling. Cookery books of the era offer detailed instructions on achieving the perfect tea sandwich, treating it with the seriousness one might reserve for heart surgery. A thick sandwich was a social embarrassment. A thin one whispered of refinement. The doorbell rings. Your guests are arriving. There are 4 of them today. Mrs. Crawford and her daughter Elizabeth, Mrs. Palmer from 2 streets over, and Miss Thornton, an unmarried woman of uncertain age who somehow manages to be present at every social gathering without ever being particularly wanted at any of them. You greet them at the drawing-room door, exchanging the prescribed pleasantries, and usher them toward the seats you've mentally assigned based on complicated calculations of status and personal dynamics. The tea ritual begins. You pour, and that's part of being the hostess. The teapot feels heavy in your hands, the spout threatens to drip, and you're managing all this while keeping the conversation flowing and looking completely at ease. The tea is excellent Darjeeling, fragrant with subtle floral notes, steam curling upward in delicate spirals as you fill each cup. Milk or lemon? Sugar? How many? Every preference needs to be remembered, filed away, respected. Mrs. Crawford likes hers strong with just a touch of milk. Mrs. Palmer wants 2 sugars and acts guilty about it every single time. Miss Thornton takes hers black, thinking this makes her intriguing. That first sip always burns a little, but everyone acts like it doesn't. The conversation moves through its expected pathways, the weather naturally, and how impossible it is to find decent servants. Remember that discussion from breakfast. It continues endlessly. And updates about various people you all know. Nothing controversial gets mentioned, nothing authentic. This is surface territory, the glossy finish concealing whatever turbulence might be roiling underneath. But don't be fooled, information is definitely being traded. Victorian women excelled at subtext, and afternoon tea was their governing body. When Mrs. Crawford mentions her daughter receiving an invitation to the Henderson Ball, she's declaring Elizabeth's social triumph and inviting you to compare it with your own daughter's options. When Mrs. Palmer sighs about her husband's demanding work schedule, she's both complaining and bragging. He works endless hours because he's so important. You notice when Miss Thornton asks probing questions about a family who departed recently, quite abruptly, she's hunting for gossip that everyone knows but no one will acknowledge. You move through these exchanges with well-practiced skill, sharing enough to seem approachable, but never so much that you become a source of scandal yourself. The tea's flavour stays on your tongue, turning slightly bitter now as the pot continues steeping, and you reach for a sandwich to counter it. The cucumber tastes cool and crisp, the bread so delicate it practically dissolves immediately. You eat with small, careful bites, as a lady should, though privately you're hungry enough to finish the entire platter. Here's something historians continue debating. Were these tea gatherings authentic social connection or elaborate displays of competition and status worry? Some scholars emphasise the genuine warmth and friendship women discovered in these meetings. The opportunity to converse with other adults, to exchange concerns, to create networks of mutual assistance in a world that granted them minimal official authority. Others highlight the inflexible etiquette, the perpetual evaluation, the way every comment and movement could be assessed and deemed inadequate. The reality, as usual, likely depends on which women were involved and the specific dynamics of each particular gathering. Your gathering today is complex. You truly appreciate Mrs. Crawford, who possesses a keen wit she keeps deliberately buried under layers of propriety. Mrs. Palmer irritates you somewhat, though you'd never acknowledge it. Miss Thornton makes you uneasy in ways you can't entirely explain. And Elizabeth Crawford is a lovely girl, but her mother's transparent matchmaking attempts on her behalf are growing tedious. Remember those morning visits from earlier? The deliberate choreography of calling cards and social calls? This is the more personal version. The visits have been completed, the relationships established, and now the core group convenes to strengthen its connections. The women surrounding you are friends, competitors, and watchdogs simultaneously. They'll help you if you falter, but they'll also observe if you misstep. They'll celebrate your happiness and quietly note your setbacks. This is friendship, Victorian fashion, real affection layered with social manoeuvring. The fire pops, the clock ticks steadily. The conversation drifts from subject to subject like a leaf floating on a lazy stream. Someone brings up a novel they've been reading, a recent work by Mr. Collins maybe, or the newest sensation from the lending library. And for a brief moment, the discussion becomes almost lively. Books are acceptable. Books are harmless. Everyone has thoughts about books, and expressing them doesn't invite scandal. You take a scone, splitting it open to expose the tender, steaming centre. The cream is thick and golden, the jam a rich ruby colour, and the pairing is quietly exquisite, sweet and indulgent and completely satisfying. This, maybe, is why afternoon tea persists. Under all the theatre and manoeuvring, there's something genuinely wonderful about gathering with others over hot cups and little delicacies. The ritual offers framework, and within that framework, even cautious women can discover moments of authentic connection. The daylight beyond the windows is starting to dim, the afternoon transitioning toward evening. Your guests will depart shortly. Etiquette requires that tea visits, like morning calls, shouldn't extend their welcome. There will be soft thanks, clasped hands, commitments to gather again. And then the drawing room will be still, the cups will be taken away, and you'll have maybe an hour to yourself before the next act begins. But right now, the tea is hot, the fire is glowing, and the voices of women fill the space like melody. Your guests have left. The tea service has been removed, and the drawing room eases into a brief, valuable quietness. But you can't relax. The clock on the mantel shows 5:30 and dinner is at 8, which means the most complex transformation of your day is about to start. You need to dress again. This will be your 4th costume today if you're tracking morning attire for breakfast and household tasks, visiting attire for afternoon calls, a somewhat refreshed version for hosting tea guests. And now the evening gown, the most intricate, the most confining, the most stunning of them all. Victorian women didn't just get dressed. They executed costume changes deserving of theatrical production, each scene requiring different armour for different confrontations. You ascend the stairs gradually, sensing the day's weight in your legs. The corset you've worn since morning has moved slightly, creating pressure in places that have become sensitive over the hours. Your lady's maid is waiting in your bedroom, the evening dress spread across the bed like a silk offering. And seeing it fills you with something between excitement and weariness. First, the current dress needs to come off. This isn't a straightforward matter of unfastening and stepping free. There are hooks along the back you can't access yourself, closures concealed beneath fabric layers that need to be undone in a particular sequence. Your maid's fingers move, swiftly experienced from years of this identical ritual. And piece by piece, your afternoon identity is deconstructed. The bodice, the skirt, the petticoats. Eventually, you stand in your corset and chemise, breathing as fully as the stays permit. The evening corset differs from the daytime version. Longer, more rigid, designed to create the precise silhouette that evening fashion requires. Some women possessed multiple corsets for various occasions, each one moulding the body in subtly different ways. Your maid unlaces the day corset and assists you into the evening one. And you grasp the bedpost again. As she tightens the laces, the pressure shifts. Familiar, yet somehow renewed, like wearing a new pair of shoes that pinch in unexpected places. Here's an interesting detail historians enjoy noting. Affluent Victorian women might replace their undergarments along with their outer clothing when dressing for dinner. Clean stockings, clean chemise, sometimes even fresh drawers. Cleanliness represented luxury, and evening dress provided an occasion to demonstrate that luxury. From the skin outward, even in the layers no one would observe, the evening gown waits. Tonight's selection is a deep burgundy silk, the shade of wine, held against candlelight, with black lace accents at the neckline and sleeves. The skirt is more voluminous than your day dresses, meant to sweep dramatically when you walk, and the bodice cuts lower, exposing more of your shoulders and chest than would be acceptable in daylight. Evening was a separate realm, with separate rules about what could be revealed and what must remain covered. Your maid helps you into the gown, securing the countless tiny hooks that line the back like an army. The fabric whispers as it drapes around you, cool on your skin, carrying a faint scent of the lavender sachets kept in your wardrobe. You stand before the mirror and see someone slightly altered from the woman who woke this morning. More refined, more intentional, armoured in elegance for the contests of the evening ahead. But you're not finished yet. The hair needs to be redone. Your daytime hairstyle was comparatively simple, pinned up, tidy. Functional evening requires something more sophisticated. Your maid takes down your hair, brushing it until it snaps with static, and then starts the slow process of constructing something architectural. Curls are encouraged into form with heated tongs that give off a faint smell of scorched hair. Pins are placed at exact angles. A decorative comb or small accessory might be included, reflecting the light when you move your head. The entire process consumes at least half an hour, and you must remain completely motionless throughout, observing in the mirror as your reflection evolves. There's something almost meditative about this ritual despite its monotony. The gentle tug of the brush, the heat of the curling tongs held close but never touching your scalp, the calm concentration of your maid as she works. The room is heated from the fire, and the evening light seeping through the curtains has adopted that amber quality that makes everything appear softer, kinder. You could nearly doze off sitting here if the corset would allow you to slouch. Historians continue debating how Victorian women felt about all this dressing and undressing. Some scholars propose that many women appreciated the ritual, the metamorphosis, the craftsmanship, the opportunity to become someone slightly transformed for each segment of the day. Others contend that the constant changing was draining and restrictive, a method of keeping women preoccupied with their own presentation so they couldn't concentrate on anything more meaningful. The reality probably differed from woman to woman and day to day. Sometimes you adore the silk on your skin, sometimes you want to scream. Tonight you're too exhausted to feel much of anything. You surrender to the process, allowing your maid to arrange and modify, and when it's finally complete, you inspect the result with detached approval. The woman in the mirror appears elegant, composed, prepared for an evening of refined entertainment. She doesn't look like someone who has been conscious since 7, who has supervised servants and made calls and visited the poor and hosted tea and changed clothes 4 times. She looks fresh. She looks effortless. This is the grand deception of Victorian femininity, that all of this is natural, that beauty just occurs, that grace is inherent, that women drift through their days without struggle or fatigue. The hours of work that produce this illusion must themselves stay invisible. No one wishes to see the mechanics behind the enchantment. Your maid assists you with the finishing touches, a mist of perfume at your wrists and throat, a final inspection of every hook and pin, the choice of gloves and fan for the evening ahead. The gloves are long, extending past your elbows, and pulling them on is its own minor battle. The fan is ivory and silk, decorated with miniature flowers, and it will function as both accessory and signal device throughout the night. How you position it, how you flutter it, transmits messages that everyone present will recognize. You take one final look in the mirror. The woman who gazes back is prepared. The evening beckons. The dining room radiates with candlelight, dozens of flames mirrored in crystal glasses, silver utensils, the burnished surface of the mahogany table. Gas lighting has arrived in many households by now, but for formal dinners, candles stay preferred. Their light is gentler, more complimentary, more forgiving to aging faces and weary eyes. You assume your seat at the table, the silk of your gown rustling against the padded chair, and brace for the evening's first performance. Dinner itself is an intricate production, but your part in it is strangely passive. The food appears in courses: soup, fish, meat, game, pudding, savouries, each one presented and served by footmen who glide with soundless precision. You eat modestly as ladies do, choosing small servings and leaving much on your plate. The corset makes substantial meals unpleasant anyway, and besides, there's something vaguely coarse about a woman with a robust appetite. You sample the soup, a clear consommé, savoury and warm, and engage in polite conversation with the gentleman positioned beside you. This is another principle of Victorian dining. The hostess must guarantee that conversation proceeds smoothly, that no guest is ignored, that subjects remain suitable for mixed company. You cannot mention politics or religion at the dinner table. You cannot bring up money or health issues or anything disagreeable. You can talk about art, literature, travel, the weather, mutual acquaintances, the same protected territories you've been traversing all day. The gentleman beside you is agreeable enough, a colleague of your husband's, and he describes a recent trip to Italy, while you nod and pose the anticipated questions. The meal extends for at least 2 hours, course following course, wine following wine, the candles diminishing in their holders. The aroma of the room transforms as the dinner advances, from the savoury richness of the meat course to the sweeter notes of the pudding, underlying always by the warm wax smell of the candles and the subtle mustiness of old wood and heavy drapes. Your feet, concealed beneath yards of silk, have started to throb in their evening slippers. Your smile has started to feel frozen, permanent, a mask you can't shed. Finally, the moment comes. The hostess, if this is another's home, or you yourself, if this is yours, stands from the table. This is the cue the ladies withdraw. Here's an interesting detail historians enjoy noting. The withdrawal of ladies after dinner was one of the most strict rituals of Victorian entertaining. When the final course was removed, the women would exit the dining room together, withdrawing to the drawing room, while the men stayed behind with their port and cigars. This separation could extend anywhere from 20 minutes to over an hour, and during that time the men were free to address the topics prohibited at the dinner table. Politics, business, crude jokes, anything inappropriate for feminine ears. What did the women do while they waited? They conversed, naturally, more openly now, without male presence to perform for. They might play a little music, someone positioning herself at the piano to pluck out a gentle melody. They might examine the hostess's recent purchases, admiring a new decoration or a piece of embroidery. They might simply sit, thankful for the relative ease, sipping tea or coffee that the servants had prepared for their entrance. You settle onto a sofa in the drawing room, arranging your skirts precisely, and accept a cup of coffee from the tray. The other ladies position themselves around the room, their dresses creating pools of colour against the subdued furnishings. The conversation is airier here, more personal. Someone mentions a book she's been reading. Another complains mildly about her children's governess. A third shares a piece of gossip so tame it barely qualifies. The fire crackles quietly, and the room feels almost intimate, despite its formal magnificence. But you're waiting. You're all waiting because the evening's entertainment can't truly commence until the gentlemen return to you. When they finally enter, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and port, the room's atmosphere shifts. Now the actual performance can begin. Someone will be requested to play the piano properly this time, not the idle plucking of the waiting period. Someone else might be encouraged to sing, if the gathering is large enough and youthful enough. There might even be dancing, though nothing too energetic. A few restrained waltzes, maybe, or the movements of a quadrille. You are requested to play. You anticipated this was coming. You always anticipate. And you've prepared a piece that is technically proficient without being ostentatious, pleasant without being noteworthy. You walk to the piano, settle yourself on the bench, and position your fingers on the keys. The ivory is cool and smooth, slightly discoloured with age, and the instrument carries the scent of polish and aged wood. You begin to play. The music permeates the room, and for a few minutes you can vanish into it. Your fingers travel through patterns mastered years ago, so thoroughly memorized they need almost no conscious thought. The other guests listen, or appear to listen, their conversations fading to whispers. This is your offering to the evening's entertainment, this modest gift of sound, this proof that you are accomplished, cultured, appropriately educated. Some historians suggest that these evening performances were authentically pleasurable for Victorian women. There's still debate among scholars about whether music making was felt as enjoyment or duty. Some women clearly loved to play, discovering real artistic fulfillment in their practice and performance. Others tolerated it as yet another obligation, one more way. Their achievements were exhibited for social validation. The diaries that remain suggest both experiences were typical, sometimes in the same woman on different nights. Tonight, you feel somewhere between. The music is lovely, and your fingers understand it well, and there's a certain tranquility in the playing itself. But you're also exhausted. You're also conscious of being observed, assessed, compared. And when the piece concludes and the polite applause flows through the room, you're grateful to surrender the bench to someone else. The evening persists. More music, more conversation, perhaps a hand or two of whist at a card table in the corner. The hours stretch toward midnight, and you suppress yawns behind your fan, cautious not to be noticed. A lady doesn't appear exhausted, even when fatigue rests on her shoulders like a tangible weight. Finally, mercifully, the guests begin to leave. Carriages are summoned, wraps are collected, goodbyes are exchanged in the hallway. You smile and thank and promise to visit. Soon the word's automatic, practiced through 1,000 such evenings, and then the door shuts and the house is silent, and you can finally stop performing. The candles have burned down, the fire has declined to embers. The smell of cigar smoke hovers faintly in the air, mixing with the fading perfume of flowers and the deeper scent of wax and wood. The night is nearly over, but not every Victorian woman obeyed the script. Not every woman embraced the endless cycles of dressing and calling and pouring tea and playing piano for partially attentive audiences. Some of them quietly, cautiously, sometimes perilously broke the rules. You've been inhabiting the respectable version of Victorian womanhood all day. The version that adhered to the etiquette books and stayed within the boundaries. But as you stand in your drawing room, the last guest's gone, the house settling into nighttime silence. Let your thoughts drift to the other women, the ones who refused, the ones who constructed secret lives behind the facade of propriety. Their stories glimmered at the margins of polite society, like flames that declined to be extinguished. Think about the writers. We've referenced them before, the women who took up pens and invented worlds, sometimes under their own names, frequently under borrowed ones. But writing was more than a pastime for these women. It was defiance made ink, independence spelled out word by word. Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Anne Bronte, three sisters in a Yorkshire parsonage who transformed into Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell, masculine names concealing feminine hands. They wrote about passion and insanity and women who desired things, dangerous things, unattainable things. Jane Eyre proclaimed herself equal to Rochester in soul and worth, and thousands of readers experienced something shift inside them. George Eliot, born Mary Ann Evans, went even further. She lived openly with a married man, George Henry Lewis, for over 2 decades, a scandal that should have ruined her. Instead, she authored some of the greatest novels in the English language and was eventually welcomed into the highest intellectual circles. Her life was a paradox the Victorians couldn't quite reconcile. Immoral in her personal arrangements, imagination beyond reproach in her artistic accomplishments. She demonstrated that the rules could be violated if you were talented enough, though the price was genuine. Her own family declined to speak to her for years. Here's an interesting detail historians enjoy noting. Many Victorian women writers endured mysterious illnesses that confined them to bed for extended periods. Some scholars now suspect these illnesses were partly tactical, a socially acceptable justification to escape household duties and social obligations, liberating time and energy for the intellectual work that mattered to them. Florence Nightingale, after her celebrated service in the Crimean War, spent decades as a semi-invalid. Managing her reform campaigns from her bed, was she truly sick? Or had she realised that invalidism granted freedoms that health did not? The artists defied, too. Women were permitted to dabble in watercolours. Women, yes, but serious art, oil painting, sculpture, anything that might rival men was discouraged or explicitly forbidden. Yet some women continued. They sneaked themselves into life drawing classes where nude models posed, shocking anyone who discovered. They displayed their work under initials or pseudonyms. They developed careers in the margins, never quite recognised, never quite silenced. And then there were the women who rejected the most basic expectation of marriage. Spinsterhood was officially regarded with pity. In Victorian England, an unmarried woman was viewed as a failure, a liability on her family, an object of subtle condescension. And yet some women selected it intentionally. They examined the legal reality of marriage, a wife's property becoming her husband's, her body becoming his, her identity absorbed into his. And they said no thank you. They existed on modest incomes, shared accommodations with other unmarried women, fashioned lives of independence that the married ladies in their drawing rooms could only dream of. Some historians contend that these spinsters were trailblazers of female autonomy. There's still debate among scholars about whether their choices were truly free or simply maximising limited options. Were they spurning marriage on principle? Or had they simply failed to secure suitable proposals? The evidence indicates both were accurate. Some women embraced independence happily. Others arrived at it by circumstance and realised to their astonishment that it fit them. The friendships between women could be revolutionary too. Victorian society accepted equality, even promoted intense emotional connections between women, passionate correspondence, proclamations of eternal love, physical affection that would raise eyebrows today. Some of these relationships were precisely what they seemed to be, deep platonic friendships in an era that romanticised female connection. But others were something additional. Women cohabitated for decades as companions, shared beds, constructed lives that resembled in every way like marriages, except for the designation. And the ladies of Llangollen, two Irish women who eloped together in the late 18th century and lived in romantic seclusion in Wales, became renowned, visited by the distinguished and prominent, their relationship simultaneously celebrated and carefully, not scrutinised too closely. You think about these women as you stand in your quiet drawing room, the fire dying to embers, the smell of candle smoke suspended in the air. Their lives were not simple. Rebellion carried consequences. Social banishment, financial struggle, the constant pressure of living against the current. But they possessed something you've scarcely experienced today. They had chosen. Their days were not scripts authored by someone else. Their hours were not dictated by etiquette, books, and social demands. They had created spaces, however, small, where they could simply be themselves. The clock ticks softly in the corner. The house groans and settles around you, old wood responding to the cooling night air. Somewhere upstairs, your maid is arranging your bedroom for the final ritual of the day, folding back the covers, warming the sheets with a bed warmer filled with coals. The ordinary machinery of your ordinary life maintains its ordinary turning, but for just a moment, standing here in the fading light, you allow yourself to wonder, what if you had been more courageous? What if you had picked up a pen, not for letters and household accounts, but for something that mattered? What if you had refused the corset, refused the calls, refused the endless performance of acceptable womanhood? The thought sparkles and vanishes like a candle wavering in a draught. You are who you are. You have made your decisions, or had them made for you, and the path not pursued grows dimmer with each passing year. But knowing that other women travel different paths, that gives you something. Hope, maybe, or simply the reassurance of knowing that the rules, however rigid they appear, have always had their quiet violators. The rebels are out there even now, in their attic rooms and rented lodgings, writing by candlelight, loving whom they choose, refusing to vanish. And tomorrow the world will continue turning, whether it approves of them or not. The stairs creak gently beneath your feet as you ascend toward your bedroom. The house has grown still now, the servants withdrawing to their own quarters, the fires in the public rooms left to burn themselves out. Only your bedroom fire still burns, maintained by your maid in preparation for this final hour of the day. The smell of coal smoke blends with something gentler. Lavender, maybe from the sachets placed among your linens, or the faint trace of the rose water you applied hours ago. Your maid waits by the door, patient as always, ready to initiate the long process of undressing you, because here is something you've discovered through this entire day. Removing Victorian clothing takes nearly as long as putting it on, maybe longer, because now you're tired, your body weighted with exhaustion, your mind clouded with the accumulated burden of everything you've accomplished since dawn. The evening gown comes off first. Your maid's fingers work down the row of hooks at your back, each tiny fastening opening with a soft click. The silk murmurs as it slides away from your shoulders, gathering around your feet like a burgundy wave. You step out of it cautiously, and your maid collects the fabric, examining it for stains or damage before hanging it away. This dress cost more than a servant makes in a year. It will be brushed, aired, and preserved until the next occasion requires it. The petticoats follow layer after layer, each one airier than the last. The bustle, that architectural device that has been protruding behind you all evening, is unfastened and set aside. You sense your body altering shape as each piece is eliminated, contracting back towards something more human, less fabricated. The relief is physical, palpable, like releasing a weight you'd forgotten you were bearing. And then, finally, the corset. Your maid unlaces it gradually, and you feel your ribs expand with each released inch. The first deep breath is almost agonizing. Your body has forgotten, over the course of the day, what it feels like to breathe completely. You press your hand to your stomach, sensing the soft flesh that has been squeezed for hours, and you inhale again, filling your lungs totally for the first time since morning. The sensation is remarkable. It is freedom of a kind, small and fleeting, but authentic. Here's an interesting detail historians enjoy noting. Some Victorian women encountered genuine health issues from extended corset wearing. Not the dramatic crushed ribs of anti-corset propaganda, but more subtle problems. Weakened back muscles, digestive troubles, shortness of breath that continued even after the stays were removed. The body adapted to its prison and sometimes forgot how to function without it. Some doctors of the era advised corset breaks, intervals of going without stays to permit the body to recover. Others maintained that corsets were perfectly healthful and that any complaints were simply feminine weakness. The debate raged in medical journals and ladies' magazines alike. You stand now in just your chemise and drawers, the thin cotton gentle against skin that has been pressed and confined all day. The air of the bedroom feels crisp against your arms, but the fire is warm and your maid has positioned your nightgown on the bed. White cotton, high-necked, modest, even in sleep. You slip it over your head, sensing the familiar weight of it settle around you like an embrace. The fabric smells clean, faintly of the soap used in washing, and it falls to your ankles in soft folds. But you're not ready for bed yet. There are still rituals to observe. Your maid guides you to the dressing table, where a single lamp burns low, throwing golden light across the mirror. The hairpins must come out. Dozens of them, it appears, each one extracted gently free and dropped into a small porcelain dish with a soft clink. Your hair cascades down as the pins release their grip, falling past your shoulders in waves that still hold the memory of the evening's elaborate style. The weight of it startles you, as it always does. All day your hair has been pinned and twisted and managed. Now it hangs loose and you feel lighter, younger, more yourself. The brushing commences. 100 strokes. The etiquette books mandated 100 strokes every night to keep the hair healthy and lustrous. Your maid draws the brush through your hair with slow, steady movements, starting at the crown and pulling down to the ends. The sensation is mesmerizing, calming, each stroke releasing a little more of the day's tension. You watch in the mirror as your reflection transforms the elaborate evening creation, dissolving into something simpler, softer, ready for sleep. Some historians debate about the purpose of these nighttime rituals. There's still discussion among scholars about whether practices like the 100 brushstrokes had genuine health advantages or were simply another form of social performance, another way of occupying women's time with tasks that signified refinement. The evidence is mixed. Brushing probably did help distribute natural oils through the hair, maintaining it healthier in an era before modern shampoos and conditioners. But the ritualistic nature of it, the exact counting, the nightly repetition, suggests something beyond mere hygiene. It was meditation, possibly a way of transitioning from the public self to the private, from the day's performance to the night's rest. The brushing ends. Your maid braids your hair into a loose plait to keep it from tangling as you sleep, securing the end with a simple ribbon. She offers you a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand, and you drink gratefully, tasting the faint mineral edge of water that has rested in a ceramic jug all day. Then she turns down the covers, fluffs the pillows, and asks if there's anything else you need. There isn't. There never is. You dismiss her with quiet thanks, and she slips from the room, closing the door gently behind her. Now, at last, you are alone. The fire crackles gently in the grate, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. The lamp on your dressing table still burns, but you extinguish it with a soft breath, and the room settles into firelight dimness. The bed calls to you, that haven of quilts and blankets you abandoned so unwillingly this morning. Do you recall how frigid the room felt then, how you dreaded touching your feet to that frozen floor? Now the linens have been heated by a warming pan, copper vessel filled with glowing coals, and when you slip between them, the warmth embraces you like a tender touch. But before rest comes, there remains one final obligation: prayer. You lower yourself beside the bed, the floorboards unyielding beneath your knees, even through the fabric of your nightgown, and you clasp your hands together. The prayers are known to you, polished smooth by countless repetitions over the years. Gratitude for today's gifts, appeals for safety through the darkness, pleas for your family's well-being, and the departed soul's peace. Your mouth forms the words almost unconsciously, the phrases rising mechanically while your thoughts wander elsewhere. What do you truly hold sacred in this hushed moment between daylight and night? That answer belongs to you alone. The outward show of devotion is unceasing in Victorian existence, but the truth of it differs from person to person, as it has always done. Certain women offered prayers with passionate hearts, sensing the divine as certainly as they sensed the floor beneath their knees. Others performed the ritual, meeting obligations without emotional connection. Most likely oscillated between these states. Certain evenings marked by authentic reverence, others simply weary. This evening, you are simply weary. The prayers conclude, and you stand and you finally settle into bed. The pillows cradle your head like familiar companions. The coverings arrange themselves around you, substantial and warm. The fire maintains its hushed dialogue with itself, snaps and whispers that sound almost like speech in a tongue you've lost. The room carries the scent of coal smoke and lavender and fresh linen, and underneath everything, the faint, indefinable fragrance of home. Your eyelids become heavy. The day is at last mercifully complete. The house seems to breathe around you in the blackness. That's the sensation during these silent hours, as though the structure itself possesses lungs expanding and contracting with the settling of aged timber, the cooling of warmed walls, the gradual exhalation of a day finally finished. You rest in your bed, wrapped in warmth, and attend to the sounds of a Victorian evening. The fire has diminished now, reduced to a mound of glowing coals that throb with weakening orange illumination. The shadows across the ceiling shift more gradually, their movements slowing as the flames recede. Soon the room will be completely dark, except perhaps for a thread of moonlight slipping past the curtain's border. But for the moment, there's still that mild glow, that gentle warmth emanating from the fireplace, and you allow your eyes to rest upon it without true focus. Your body feels altered without the corset, freer, more authentically yours. You can sense your heartbeat in places you'd ceased to notice. Your stomach, your lower spine, the tender spaces between your ribs. Each breath arrives easier now, fuller, filling you completely down. The mattress supporting you is packed with horsehair and wool, solid but accommodating, and it retains the contour of your body like a recollection. The sheets are linen, somewhat coarse against your skin, heated by your own warmth now that the bed warmer has been taken away. This is the period of transition, the period between consciousness and sleep, when the mind releases its hold on the day and starts to drift toward dreams. Victorian women understood this period intimately. They passed so many of their conscious hours among others, encircled by servants and relatives and social duties, that these nighttime moments of genuine solitude became treasured, hallowed. Nearly a time when nobody demanded anything, when no act was necessary, when you could simply be in the darkness and allow your mind to travel where it wished. Where does your mind travel? This evening, perhaps it returns to the morning, to the jolt of frigid air against your face, the ceremony of dressing that initiated this interminable day. You recall the corset strings tightening, the layers accumulating around you like protective covering, the identity you assumed once all the components were positioned. That woman seems remote now, almost like a figure in a tale, the household's lady, the proprietress, the social being who made visits and served tea and smiled until her cheeks hurt. Perhaps your mind drifts to the servant who kindled your fire this morning, the one whose features you scarcely noticed. She's asleep now as well, somewhere in the garret, curled in a cramped bed with another maid for shared warmth. Her day extended longer than yours, her work more demanding physically, her rest more arduously won. You'll likely never understand her dreams, her anxieties, her private aspirations. But this evening, in the equality of darkness, you're both merely women at rest, your breathing slowing toward the identical destination. Perhaps you consider the impoverished woman you called upon this afternoon, Mrs. Henley, in her confined tenement chamber. Is she comfortable tonight? Is her infant sleeping soundly, or wailing with the feeble, depleted cry of starvation? The basket you delivered will assist somewhat for a brief period. Tomorrow she'll awaken to the identical challenges, the identical crushing poverty, the identical desperate calculations of survival. And you'll awaken to your privileged life, your servants, your perpetual minor duties. The chasm between you will stay enormous and impossible to cross, regardless of how many baskets you transport into those confined streets. Here's something the night reveals to you if you permit it. We are all more similar than the daylight implies. The mistress and the maid, the wealthy woman and the destitute one, the nonconformist and the traditionalist, all of them recline at night and yield to the identical darkness. All of them shut their eyes and wish for rest, for tranquility, for a few hours of oblivion. Sleep is the ultimate leveller. Even beyond death, it visits everyone, irrespective of position. And in its depths, all the meticulous divisions of Victorian life dissolve into emptiness. The fire releases a final gentle snap, and an ember crumbles apart, sending a minute cascade of sparks up the flue. The room darkens further still. The sounds of the evening press nearer, the groan of the house, the murmur of wind against the panes, the faraway bark of a dog somewhere in the slumbering city. London never completely falls silent, not wholly. There's always something moving, someone conscious, some minor drama occurring in the darkness. But here in your chamber, the silence is profound enough to feel like a covering. Your eyelids grow heavier still. The day's procession of faces starts to blur and vanish. The visitors at tea, the salesgirls in the department store, your husband across the supper table, your children observed briefly in the nursery. They become unclear, dreamlike, already sliding into the past where all days ultimately go. Tomorrow will deliver new faces, new duties, new performances. But tomorrow is a distant land, impossibly far from this warm, dark, present instant. You think perhaps of all the Victorian women who have rested in beds like this one, in chambers like this one, watching the fire expire and awaiting sleep. Generations of them, extending back through the decades. Your mother, your grandmother, their mothers preceding them. All of them wore corsets and made calls and supervised households. All of them yielded eventually to nights like this one. Their concerns and victories have vanished into history now, their names remembered by only a handful, their intricate daily rituals as remote as ancient rites. And someday you will join them in that oblivion. Your morning visits, your embroidery, your meticulously folded calling cards. All of it will dissolve into the extended silence of time. But not this evening. This evening you are still here, still warm, still breathing. The fire's final coals glow like faraway stars, and the darkness envelops you like velvet. And sleep is very, very near now. The day has concluded. Release it. Sense the weight of the blankets pressing softly against your body, keeping you secure, keeping you motionless. The pillow supporting your head is yielding, familiar, moulded by all the nights you've rested here previously. You are precisely where you ought to be. You have accomplished enough. You have been enough. The endless catalogue of tasks and duties can wait until morning. Right now, there is nothing demanded of you, nothing whatsoever. Your breathing slows, in and out, full and steady, like the tide withdrawing from the shore. Each exhale removes a little more strain from your body, releasing it into the darkness where it dissolves and vanishes. Your shoulders ease, your hands unfold, the muscles in your face release, smoothing away the expressions you've carried all day. The courteous smile, the focused interest, the measured neutrality. You don't require them anymore. You can simply exist. The fire is fading now, its warmth a mild memory on your skin. The room is motionless. The house is motionless. The entire world seems to hold its breath, waiting with you, settling with you, hushing with you into peace. You are protected here. The night embraces you. The darkness is not vacant. It is filled with rest, filled with comfort, filled with the profound silence that follows a long day's passage. Remember how far you've journeyed today, from the cold jolt of morning to the elaborate ceremony of dressing through the breakfast table and the prayer book, the morning visits and the measured conversations, through needlework and account books, through crowded streets and hushed parlours, through charity calls and afternoon tea, through the transformation of evening attire and the extended performance of dinner, through music and conversation and the gradual unwinding of night. You've inhabited an entire world in a single day, and now that world is releasing you, allowing you to drift free into the mild waters of sleep. The women who preceded you are resting now, somewhere beyond time. The women who will follow you have not yet started their journeys. But you here, this evening, you are suspended in this flawless moment of stillness, this pause between heartbeats, this tender and sacred space where waking ends and dreaming begins. The coals glow their last. The darkness intensifies, and you release finally, completely yielding to the warmth that has collected around you like a benediction. Sleep arrives now, tender and profound. It transports you away from corsets and calling cards, from ledgers and lace, from all the beautiful draining machinery of Victorian womanhood. It transports you into peace. The long day has concluded. Rest now, as they once did, as all women have since the beginning of time. Sweet dreams.